Nigeria has a promising outlook for the video game industry. As Africa's gaming industry sees continuous growth, Nigeria happens to be one of the leading nations in terms of gaming activities, revenues, and the number of people playing games. According to Renaissance Capital, who we just saw in the prior segment, at the end of 2021, 23% of Nigeria's population was involved in playing games, while the industry recorded $185 million in that year. So, Favour Ogunniranye, analyst with Financial Derivatives Company Limited, joins us now to speak further on the matter. Favour, good afternoon. Thank you so much. I almost said good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, great to have you. So what's the metrics? What's behind the rise in video game playing here?
I would like to say that the young population is a major driver. I mean, we know that Nigeria has a huge youthful population, meaning that from age 30 and below, they constitute about 70% of Nigeria's population. So, what that is, and that is an age group that actually that influences the gaming market. And aside that, you also have internet and smartphone penetration. So, in the last 3 years, internet penetration has increased from about 38.01% to 48.12%. And this is a similar upward trend I'm also seeing in smartphone penetration. And this really just means that a lot of people can now have access to video games and the gaming market. And so I guess these are the major drivers for why the gaming market in Nigeria is actually booming and increasing.
Okay, now you mentioned, I guess, mobile phones. What about data consumption concerns? Because, I mean, if you're sitting on your phone for hours and hours playing games, I would imagine that's going to cost some money.
Yeah,
exactly.
So ordinarily, most of the games that are being developed now, they actually consume little data. I mean, research has shown that most modern games consume about 45 megabytes to about 250 megabytes of internet data per hour. And that is the same data consumption when you compare it to music streaming. But then that's way, way less than the HD video streaming on Netflix, which consumes about 3 gigabytes. So it actually consumes little data. But then we know that games are quite addictive. So that means that the consistent use of it means higher data consumption. But then when we are talking about data consumption concerns, I think we could talk about 5G, because we know that once we transition into that high level of network, that means that follows suit with higher increased network speed and consequently data consumption. And in the long term, that can actually bite into people's budgets and income if it's not increasing. Okay. So I guess that's concern.
Is this accessible to a lot of youth? What about the devices upon which the consoles, the platforms, and does it require higher end devices, even for phones?
To an extent, yes, because we can't say that 7-8 years ago the devices we're using are devices that we could use to access video games. I mean, we can say that for maybe phones that were produced 3-4 years ago, but we can't say that for 7-8 years ago. And I think the benefit of this increased compatibility is that a lot of people have access to it, especially now that these video games, we are seeing they are more interactive. So people are using that to build their network and, increase globalization. So that is something, it's a positive thing that it doesn't require higher end devices actually.
What about thank you for that, the revenue growth potential?
The gaming industry has been doing really well in terms of revenue. For the last 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic was a major catalyst because, there was lack of socializing. So a lot of people, that was a major activity people indulged in. And even though it seems like the pandemic is somewhat behind us, but there are still various drivers. We're talking about multiple technological advancements, talking about the virtual reality, metaverse, talking about cloud gaming, electronic sports. So all of that also means that a lot of software companies, it means more revenue for software companies, but then there's also a knock-on effect on other players in the ecosystem. We're talking about in terms of hardware, the consoles, the pads, talking about telcos, we're talking in terms of data consumption. You're also talking about, telephone producers and even crypto and payment platforms, especially now that we have the play-as-you-earn feature. So there is growth in the industry in terms of revenue.
And I'm glad you mentioned play-as-you-earn. A lot of people are getting excited about that. So what are the details in play-as-you-earn?
Well, play as you earn.
Pretty obvious, huh?
Yes, nutshell, it just means more income. For people who have an existing one, is a way to build a more diversified income base, especially in Nigeria, where it's kind of the go-to thing now, to have a diverse income base. And, the unemployment here is about 33.3%. So and if I should permit me to make reference to the Squid Game, that movie just showed us that money was the major reason why we saw increased participation, even though they are aware of the consequences. So,
a streaming reference that shows you the influence of Netflix, Arise, Play, and so on. What can government do to grow the market for video games?
I'll look at it in terms of investments. So, like you said at the beginning, Nigeria. Gaming, I think consumer spending was about $185 million, and only about 25% of the population actually accounted for that. So that means there's growth there, and that means Nigeria is a destination point for foreign investors. So what government can do in form of policy clarity, in form of improving the ease of doing business, so that it improves investors' confidence. But then government should also try and regulate the industry as well, because they need to ensure that the age limit is being adhered to, and also the kind of content that is put out there, that it doesn't have a negative or adverse impact on people.
Okay, great stuff. Now, playing games is one thing. Making them is another. There's a chart. I want you to take a look at this chart. It's for university graduates in I think in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, math. So look at computing, for instance.
Yeah.
And so it's really low. But then more importantly, the gap between male and female students. So how do we get more girls into computing? Especially look at the gap in engineering. I mean, it's again, this is for our viewers can see, it's the National Universities Commission STEM graduates as of 2019. So yeah, Favour, what do we do? I'm putting all this on you. What's the solution?
So I think we need to go back to the schools, to be honest, because I believe that most of the things that are being taught, there's this huge gap. It's not in line with the trends that are happening now, especially in the technological space. So, for example, arts department, a lot of things, modifications are going on in terms of digital art. I wonder how many schools are incorporating that kind of thing into the curriculum, into what they do. So I think we need to go back to these schools, and even if you find schools that actually do all these things, there would be high-end schools. So I think that's where public-private partnership comes in, NGOs, so they can reach middle schools and public schools as well, so they don't miss out. And I think an important thing is also to develop the ecosystem. I mean, this kind of industry has to thrive here to interest people to want to study computing or any of these STEM categories. So I guess that's something we can do.
Encouraging. Favour Ogunniranye, analyst with Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the gaming industry. Appreciate your insights.